1643, a young samurai ruined his life in less than 3 seconds. Not in battle, not from a wound, not because he lacked skill. He lost everything because he could not control one emotion for one brief moment. 3 seconds. That was all it took to destroy his position, stain his name, and nearly cost him his life. And the uncomfortable truth is this: most people are doing the exact same thing today, not with swords, with words, with text messages sent too fast, with anger that rises too quickly, with reactions that arrive before thought has a chance to speak. A comment from your boss, a disrespectful message, a delay you didn't expect, a mistake someone else made. And suddenly your body tightens, your breathing changes, your tone sharpens, and before you even realize what's happening, you've already done damage. To a relationship, to your peace of mind, to your future. The good news is that this pattern can be changed. Centuries ago, the samurai developed a practical method for exactly this problem. Not a vague philosophy, not a motivational slogan, a system. It was built on 3 principles: mushin, the empty mind; ma, the sacred space between stimulus and response; wabi-sabi, the acceptance of imperfection. Together, these principles create what modern neuroscience would call elite emotional regulation. But to the samurai, it was something simpler: an unshakable mind. To understand how this works, you need to meet a man named Henry Miller. Because Henry had everything most people think they want, and he was still losing control of his life. San Francisco, present day. Henry Miller was 34 years old, and on paper he looked successful. He was VP of product at a fast-growing AI startup in San Francisco. He had a high salary, a respected title, a team of 47 people, industry recognition, the kind of resume that made people assume he was winning. But inside, Henry was fighting a private war. He exploded constantly, not all the time. Just enough to poison everything. Meetings that should have lasted 30 minutes turned into confrontations. Emails written late at night came out sharp, cutting, and full of tension. Small disagreements at home somehow transformed into full arguments before he even knew what was happening. And the worst part? He could see it happening while it was happening. He would hear himself say something cruel and think, "Stop! Stop right now, you're making this worse." But he couldn't stop. It was like there was no space between what he felt and what he did. Anger came, reaction followed immediately. His 8-year-old son, Jake, had already noticed. "Dad's in a bad mood again," the boy told his mother one evening. "It's better not to talk to him right now." That sentence hit harder than any criticism at work ever had. But even that wasn't enough to change him. Not yet. The real collapse came on a Wednesday afternoon during a presentation with investors. Henry's chief engineer, Derek, had been growing quieter for months. Talented, respected, indispensable. During the middle of the meeting, in front of the investors, in front of the product team, in front of everyone, Derek closed his laptop and stood up. "I can't do this anymore," he said. The room went silent. Henry felt every eye turned toward him. Derek didn't look angry. That was somehow worse. He looked tired. "Henry," he continued, "you're brilliant, but working under you is impossible. You explode over everything. Nobody feels safe speaking honestly. I can't keep building in an environment where one bad moment sets the whole room on fire." No one interrupted him. No one defended Henry. No one even looked surprised. And in that silence, Henry understood something devastating. This was not one man overreacting. This was the truth everyone had been waiting for someone else to say. That night, his wife was waiting for him at home. Jake was already asleep. She had clearly been crying. "We need to talk," she said. There was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion, and that frightened him more than shouting would have. "I can't keep living like this, Henry," she said. "Jake is afraid of your moods. I'm afraid of your reactions, not physically but emotionally. We never know what's going to set you off. It feels like we're always bracing for impact." Henry sat down and said nothing, because there was nothing to defend. She was right. Then came the sentence that made everything real. "If you don't find a way to change," she said quietly, "I have to start thinking about what's best for me and for Jake." That was the moment Henry finally understood the truth. He did not have an anger problem, he had a control problem. More specifically, he had no control over the crucial half-second between feeling and action. And if he didn't learn how to reclaim that space, he was going to lose everything that mattered. What was actually happening in his brain? Modern neuroscience explains Henry's pattern with brutal clarity. Between a stimulus and a reaction, there is a tiny interval, often just 0.2 to 0.5 seconds. In that microscopic gap, the brain decides what takes control. The amygdala is the emergency system, fast, reactive, emotional. It is designed for immediate survival. The prefrontal cortex is the executive system, slower, deliberate, capable of judgment, restraint, and choice. When someone lacks self-control, the amygdala hijacks the situation before the prefrontal cortex can fully engage. In simple language, they do not choose the reaction. They become the reaction. And the more often that happens, the more the pattern strengthens. Until one day, reacting impulsively no longer feels like a choice at all. It feels like personality. It feels like identity. It feels like this is just how I am. That is where Henry was. But a few days later, sitting alone in a cafe, exhausted and confused, he was about to meet someone who would show him a different way of using his mind. Not by fighting harder, not by suppressing emotion, but by creating space, and that was the beginning of everything. 3 days after the conversation with his wife, Henry found himself sitting alone in a quiet cafe in San Francisco. He didn't remember deciding to go there. He just needed somewhere that didn't feel like work, didn't feel like home, and didn't feel like pressure. He ordered coffee and opened his laptop. Within minutes, the same pattern started again. Emails, Slack messages, missed updates, deadlines. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. His breathing became shallow. His jaw tightened. The pressure was building again. Then his hand bumped the coffee cup. The entire cup spilled across the table and onto his laptop. "Damn it!" he snapped loudly. The cafe went silent for a moment. Henry froze. And that's when he noticed the man sitting at the next table. An older Japanese man, maybe around 60, calm and composed, sipping green tea and reading a small book filled with Japanese characters. The man looked at him, not with irritation or judgment, just curiosity. "Are you always running like this?" he asked. Henry blinked. "Excuse me?" The man nodded slightly toward Henry's hands. "Your fingers move like you're racing someone. Your eyes jump from screen to screen. Your breathing is fast." He paused. "Your whole body looks like it's trying to live in 3 moments at once." Something about that observation landed uncomfortably close to the truth. Henry leaned back in his chair. "I guess, yeah, probably." The man smiled slightly. "My name is Kenji." Then he asked a question that would change everything. "Do you want to know why you cannot stop reacting?" Henry should have been skeptical. A stranger offering life advice in a cafe usually triggers suspicion. But there was something about Kenji's presence, quiet, steady, unhurried, that made Henry curious instead. "Yes," Henry said slowly. "I do." Kenji closed his book. "Your mind is too full." Henry frowned. "What does that mean?" Kenji picked up Henry's empty coffee cup and tilted it slightly. "If this cup is already full," he said, You cannot pour more tea into it. It spills everywhere. He placed the cup down. Your mind is like that. Thoughts, worries, plans, expectations, frustrations. So many things inside that when something small happens, he pointed toward the spilled coffee. Everything spills out. Henry sat quietly. The metaphor was painfully accurate. So what do I do? He asked. Kenji leaned forward slightly. First, he said, you learn Mushin. Mushin, the empty mind. Mushin means without mind, Kenji explained. Henry frowned. So, not thinking? Kenji shook his head. Not exactly. Mushin does not mean having no thoughts. That is impossible. It means not becoming trapped inside them. He gestured toward the street outside. Imagine your thoughts are cars passing on a road right now. Every time a thought appears, you jump into the car and let it drive you. Anger drives, fear drives, frustration drives. In Mushin, he continued, you stay on the sidewalk. You watch the cars pass. You do not need to get into everyone. Henry thought about his meetings. A comment appears. He instantly climbs into the anger. A mistake happens. He instantly climbs into frustration. There is no distance, no observation, just reaction. So Mushin is observing thoughts? Henry asked. Yes, Kenji said. When your mind is empty in that way, something important appears. Space. And in that space you can choose. Henry nodded slowly, but something still felt incomplete. Okay, he said. Let's say I learn this. How does that stop me from exploding in a meeting? Kenji smiled. Because Mushin creates the condition for the second principle. He paused. It is called Ma. Ma. The sacred pause. Kenji tapped the table gently. In music, he said, the silence between notes is what makes rhythm possible. In architecture, empty space gives shape to the structure. In life, the space between stimulus and response gives you freedom. That space is Ma. Henry leaned forward. Stimulus and response. Yes, Kenji nodded. Someone criticizes you. That is the stimulus. You explode. That is the response. He raised one finger. But between those two things, there is always a tiny space. Henry thought about what the neuroscientists described, that half-second gap between impulse and reaction. So you're saying self-control lives in that space? Kenji nodded. Exactly. Most people do not notice it. They move directly from stimulus to reaction. But when you learn Mushin, your mind becomes quiet enough to see the space. And when you see it, you can use it. Henry stared at the table. Use it how? Kenji answered with one word. Breath. Henry looked confused. Kenji smiled. When someone provokes you, your body reacts immediately. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, breathing becomes fast. If you take one conscious breath before responding, you create Ma. That breath becomes the space, and inside that space, the prefrontal cortex wakes up. Logic returns, choice returns. You are no longer reacting, Kenji said. You are responding. Henry thought about Derek quitting, about the meeting, about his son avoiding him. How many of those moments could have been different with one breath? Probably all of them. And the third principle? Henry asked quietly. Kenji leaned back. That one, he said, is the most difficult, wabi-sabi. The beauty of imperfection. Kenji pointed toward a shelf behind the counter. There was a small ceramic vase there. It had a visible crack running through its side. But instead of hiding the crack, it had been repaired with a line of gold. Do you see that vase? Kenji asked. Yes. In Japan, we repair broken objects using gold lacquer. The technique is called kintsugi. Instead of hiding the damage, we highlight it. The crack becomes the most beautiful part. Henry tilted his head. And how does that relate to anger? Kenji's answer was immediate. You explode because reality does not match your expectations. Henry didn't respond. Kenji continued. You expect people to perform perfectly. You expect projects to move smoothly. You expect conversations to go exactly as planned. And when reality breaks that image, you go to war. Henry felt the truth of that instantly. A delayed project, an imperfect presentation, a mistake in execution. Every time something deviated from his internal picture of how things should be, anger arrived. So, wabi-sabi, Kenji said calmly, is learning to accept imperfection, not as failure, but as reality. Henry crossed his arms. So I'm just supposed to accept everything? Kenji shook his head. No. You change what you can change. But you stop fighting what cannot be perfect. He pointed again at the vase. The crack is part of the object now. You can hate it, or you can accept it, but either way, the crack exists. Henry leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long time, something inside him felt lighter. So let me see if I understand, he said slowly. Mushin, observe thoughts. Ma, create space before reacting. Wabi-sabi, accept imperfection instead of fighting it. Kenji nodded. Exactly. Henry looked at him. And how do I learn all of this? Kenji reached for a napkin and wrote an address, then he slid it across the table. Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Henry looked at the address. A dojo? Kenji smiled. You want self-control? Then we train. Henry arrived at the address the next morning at 6:03 a.m. Late. The place was a small dojo hidden between two quiet streets. No flashy sign, no advertisement. Just a simple wooden door and a faint smell of incense inside. When Henry stepped in, Kenji was already there. Sitting perfectly still in seiza, the traditional Japanese posture, facing a small candle burning beside a wooden altar. Kenji did not turn around. You are late, he said calmly. Henry glanced at his watch. 3 minutes. Kenji finally looked at him. For a reactive mind, 3 minutes is an eternity. Henry swallowed. Sit. Henry sat awkwardly beside him. His legs protested immediately. Close your eyes, Kenji said. Breathe. Henry obeyed. Within seconds, his mind began racing. I should check those emails. The investor meeting is tomorrow. Did my wife mean what she said? Jake needs a dentist appointment. The noise inside his head was overwhelming. Kenji spoke again. Is your mind screaming right now? Henry opened one eye. Yes. Good. Kenji's voice remained calm. Now observe the thoughts. Do not fight them. Do not chase them. Just watch them appear and disappear, like cars passing on a highway. You do not need to enter every car. Henry tried. It was harder than any meeting he had ever survived. Every thought tried to pull his attention. Every worry demanded engagement. But he kept observing. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then something strange happened. For a brief moment, maybe 2 seconds, the noise stopped. There were no thoughts, no planning, no anger, just awareness. Henry's eyes opened instantly. What was that? He asked. Kenji smiled slightly. That, he said, was Mushin, training the space. Kenji stood and walked to the center of the dojo. From a rack on the wall, he grabbed 2 shinai bamboo training swords. He tossed one to Henry. Henry caught it awkwardly. I have no idea how to use this, he said. Good, Kenji replied. This is not about the sword. Kenji stepped into a stance. I will attack slowly. Your job is not to block, Henry frowned. Then what do I do? Kenji raised the shinai. Feel the moment between my movement and your response. That moment is Ma. Kenji swung slowly downward. Henry reacted instantly, raising the shinai to block. Kenji stopped the strike halfway. "No! You reacted. I do not want reaction. I want choice." They reset. Kenji attacked again. This time, Henry forced himself to watch the movement, to wait, to feel the moment before responding. At the last possible instant, he lifted the shinai and redirected the strike. Kenji nodded. "Better." "Did you feel the difference?" Henry did. The first movement had been automatic. The second had been deliberate, chosen. "In life," Kenji explained, "you rarely have ma. Someone criticizes you. You explode. A mistake happens. You react. No space, no choice." Kenji lowered his shinai. "But ma can be created." "How?" Henry asked. Kenji answered with a single word. "Breath. When something provokes you," he continued, "take one deep breath. That breath creates space. And inside that space, you decide." Henry thought about his team, about Derek leaving, about every moment he had reacted without thinking. Every single one. The third principle. After an hour of training, Henry sat on the dojo floor exhausted. Kenji walked to a shelf and picked up a small ceramic vase. A thin crack ran across the side. But instead of hiding it, the crack had been repaired with gold. "This is kintsugi," Kenji said. "When something breaks, we repair it with gold. We do not hide the damage. We honor it." Henry nodded slowly. "And this connects to wabi-sabi?" "Yes." Kenji placed the vase down. "You explode because you expect life to be perfect. You expect people to perform correctly. You expect plans to work smoothly. And when reality breaks those expectations, you attack reality." Henry stared at the floor. It was painfully accurate. "How do I stop that?" he asked. Kenji's answer was simple. "Accept imperfection, not with resignation, with understanding. People will disappoint you. Projects will fail. You will make mistakes. That is not the problem. The problem is believing life should be otherwise." Henry thought about his team again. Every explosion he'd had at work came from the same source, an expectation that everything should run perfectly, and when it didn't, anger. "So whenever anger rises," Kenji continued, "ask yourself a question." Henry looked up. "What question?" Kenji answered quietly. "Am I angry at reality, or at my expectation of how reality should be?" Henry exhaled slowly. That question alone could change everything. The first test. The next few weeks were brutal. Kenji gave Henry 3 daily exercises. 1. Motion practice every morning, 15 minutes of observing thoughts. 2. Create ma in every interaction, 1 breath before responding. 3. Practice wabi-sabi. Identify 1 unrealistic expectation each day and release it. The third day nearly broke him. During a design meeting, a young designer presented a mock-up that was completely wrong. Old Henry felt the anger instantly, the heat, the tension, the urge to attack. Then he remembered. Ma. He inhaled slowly. 2 seconds. In that space, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The designer looked exhausted, probably hadn't slept, probably trying to impress him. Henry exhaled. "Thank you for presenting," he said calmly. "I see the direction you are going, but let's realign with the brief and review it tomorrow." The designer blinked in surprise, clearly expecting a verbal explosion. "Oh, okay. Sorry." Henry nodded. "No problem." For the first time in years, a mistake didn't turn into a war. The change at home week 2 brought a harder test. Henry and his wife were arguing about vacation plans, voices rising, frustration building. "You never think about what I want," she said. Old Henry would have exploded. Instead, he breathed, "Ma." Then he remembered Wabi Sabi. He had expected them to agree easily. Why would they? They were two different people. "You're right," he said quietly. I decided on Hawaii without asking you what you wanted." His wife blinked. "Wait, what?" "I'm sorry," Henry continued. "Tell me what matters to you." She stared at him, then laughed. "Who are you? And what did you do with my husband?" They talked for an hour, and for the first time in months, the conversation felt peaceful. That night, Jake walked into Henry's room. "Dad?" "Yes, champ?" "You're less angry now." Henry felt his chest tighten. "I'm trying," he said softly. Jake hugged him. "I like this version of you." Henry hugged him back. "So do I." The real meaning of control. 6 months later, Henry was sitting in the same cafe where everything had started. Jake was beside him drinking hot chocolate and drawing. His wife would arrive soon. Kenji entered the cafe. He noticed Henry immediately. "You look different," Kenji said. "I am different," Henry replied. Kenji sat down. "Tell me." Henry thought for a moment. "Self-control isn't about suppressing emotions," he said. "It's about creating enough space to choose what to do with them." Kenji smiled. "You understand." Henry looked at Jake, drawing beside him. "I used to think control meant dominating everything." He paused. "But real control comes from letting go of what doesn't matter." Kenji nodded. "Remember one thing. This is not something you achieve once. It is something you practice every day." Henry nodded. "I know. And when life breaks you again," Kenji added quietly, "that is when you discover whether you truly learned." Henry smiled. "When that happens," he said, "I'll breathe. I'll create Ma, and I'll remember that the problem was never imperfection. It was expecting perfection." Kenji stood up and left the cafe. Henry sat there watching his son draw. For the first time in years, his mind was quiet. No war, no pressure, no need to control everything, just presence. And he finally understood something that had taken him 34 years to learn. Self-control is not about force. It is about space. Mushin teaches you that you are not your thoughts. Ma reminds you that freedom exists in the pause. Wabi Sabi shows you that imperfection is not the enemy. Expecting perfection is. And once you understand that, you stop reacting. You start choosing. And that is the true secret of the unshakable mind.